Yes, that's exactly what they'll do. They'll come to your land, they'll tell you if you can get the grant, and they'll ask you your goals. So that's good.
So like I just apply and then somebody will contact me and ask questions.
Yeah.
See if I can
Qualify.
Okay.
Office contact or something for them.
Okay.
They have a lot of money. And a lot of natural resource professionals can do it. And then there's another piece of funding. If you have less than 5 acres, you may very well be still eligible for the NRCS EQIP programs, and those are amazing. There's like 1,000-page document of all of the conservation work you can do that they'll cover. It's wild. They'll help you plant a food forest, they'll help you plant a native meadow, they'll help you plant a buffer along your stream if there's not enough vegetation to protect the water. They'll help with managing the forest overstory so that you're not forced to just cut trees for money. You can actually cut trees for the health of the forest. Like the trees that we looked at, you're not going to make any money on, you know, but that's what needs to be thinned. So,
and when you say help, hands-on help or?
They'll fund both of these are cost sharing grants, so they'll fund like 60 to 80% of the cost of doing all of this, and the other 20% you can just cover with your own labor. So you actually don't necessarily have to. You have to like buy the deer fence, but then they'll reimburse you. So it's pretty cool. And then if you like put up the deer fence with a friend, you can say we did 8 hours. Like that's our 20% on the cost of this fence. So it's pretty amazing, all the support for private landowners, farms, nonprofits, everybody. But yeah, so they would help. You know, you can get these agencies and stuff to help with the figuring this out, prioritizing in your land.
Silly question.
Yeah.
You put up a deer fence, does that also restrict other animals coming and going? Like if you got coyotes and bears?
Great question.
And
Yeah.
things?
Yeah, it's really important. What I would do, and what hopefully a natural resource professional would help with too, is look at your property on an aerial map and zoom out. And if you're just surrounded by farm fields and you're the only forest, then you might be a really important passageway for bears and deer, particularly if you're in you got farm fields and there's just hedgerows between. Those hedgerows are super important right now because of the fragmentation of wildlife habitat. So yeah, you can pretty much zoom out and see it would make sense for animals to be able to pass through this way, and I don't want to block that off. You can also, on the ground, as you're walking around, you can see deer trails and wildlife trails. You can think about trying to avoid blocking some of those off, maybe building your fence in between them. And actually, animals will use these trails that CLC maintains. So, by building your exclosure in here, you're allowing wildlife passageway. But, another thing to consider is coyote and fox and a number of others can dig. Possum and raccoons and the spiky ones, porcupines. They can all climb over. So a lot of wildlife will not be bothered by this, but certainly bears would be a consideration, especially if you got a beautiful blueberry patch and you've got bears living there. Maybe maybe should not be a deer exclosure. So deer exclosures.
Doing a deer exposure, not just pushing the problem onto your neighbors.
Fair question. The concept of them providing this funding is to have a whole network of these areas where we're getting forest regeneration, which is so important. In theory, if there's less food available, their population will just go down. They're going to be less fertile. They're going to reproduce less if there's less food and calories available to them. So. And then so there's the different ways and different approaches to protecting these baby trees that we need to see coming in here. So there's the bigger deer fence, or there's tree tubes. There's planting, maybe with the tree tubes, and then kind of just random chicken wire fence and stuff. And then there's also slash walls. So if your land has a ton of big invasives that are like 3 inches or bigger diameter, you can fell them all and build like a big slash wall and that will also protect inside from deer. So it's just a wall made of vegetation and brush, and that's kind of cool habitat too, like back to the jungle gym theory. So there's a million ways, but there's an advantage to the deer fence, which is that it's not just about regenerating the forest, it's also all this amazing like native wildflowers that we hope to see in spring, like trillium and various orchids, and there's so many understory species, like even like flowering dogwood shrubs. Used to be kind of this beautiful feature of our understory in spring, and all those species I just mentioned are like deer candy. They love them. So if you put up a big deer fence, even like somewhat big, like a half an acre or something, you'll get all this other diversity in there that we're missing right now because of the huge deer population. So that's a positive of the exclosure versus the tree tube method. You could also just get a bunch of tree tubes and go around and protect the first year sugar maples and white oaks and stuff that come up in the spring. And that's great too. Like you're still helping us have a future forest. And then there's the hunting option, intensive hunting. So there's a lot of approaches. Advocating for policy change around deer.
Can you tell us to which edges?
When you fell a tree, something that often is just the default in the forestry industry, you fell a tree and you got the big crown falls on the ground. The default is to cut that down and lower it to the ground because it doesn't look good. But that actually, unfortunately, that would have been one of the only places that plants that deer like could have grown. So if you could keep some big brushy stuff in forestry, we call it coarse woody debris, CWD. We want a lot of it. And yeah, we have to kind of adjust our aesthetics a little bit. So kind of going back to the forest as more of a jungle gym design. That affect sugar maples, and some that affect black walnuts and stuff too. But there's all every native tree we have has a million pathogens. And this is one of them. It is a native canker, so it's not like you have to eradicate this from your woods. But when people do what's called high grading logging, where you take out over time all the biggest, healthiest trees, you end up with more of this than there should be. So, if you keep taking out the biggest, healthiest trees, then you are left with trees that are like more susceptible to disease. And so is this the seeds that we want for the long term in the deer exposure? Probably not. We want to, you kind of almost think of it as like a garden, or as if you were breeding tomatoes or something. So you could fell some like this. I mean, sometimes these cankers do form cool wildlife cavities. And again, we would never cut down a tree with a cavity, because very likely wildlife will be living in there. And if there's snow on the ground, you can see their little footprints. Or if you look down below the tree, often there will be little nuts and stuff. So you can, before I ever mark a tree as a forester, I always look around the base and see if anyone's living in there. Because, but this is not an open cavity. So it could be good to just bring down a little bit of the prevalence of disease in this stand. There's actually quite a few nectary Eupella cankers in this stand. But right now we have this white pine weevil that eats the top and causes
Regenerate New York grant to press submit on, and it disappeared. They ran out of money on the last day.
The state ran out of money.
That specific program did. It was very successful this year, and they had a lot more interest than I had anticipated. But we ended up getting some money actually just through the Land Trust Alliance. So that's not a pot of money that is. Yeah, exactly.
Could you apply to the NRCS?
Not for this project, but the NRCS can also help fund a forester to make your forest management plan, and then that is oftentimes the first step in applying for the next grant to implement that plan. So that's something that if you have a chunk of forest, I would definitely look into as the NRCS.
You're gonna send an email with some of these things.
Yeah, we'll follow up with an email.
Yeah. The alphabet soup.
Right.
Yeah.
What are some of the policy things we can advocate for that are bigger than deer fencing? I mean, it seems like, based on the numbers you shared, going from 20 to 100 per square, it seems like hunting law is not anywhere near sufficient.
One interesting thing that is currently illegal is the market sale of venison. Personally, I'm really interested in seeing that change. I think that more opportunities we can give for folks to make a living off of the land, the better. And I think that this is one that if folks are incentivized to do more hunting and sell the venison that's harvested, then that's one of the only ways that we'll be able to actually make a meaningful dent in the population.
You gotta convince people to not go for the big antlers.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so hard. Like,
and if you're trying to kind of run a business or a side business off of it, I think you'll just kind of take what you can get. It'll be a little bit less trophy oriented and more just thinking about the carcass weight. Do you have any some other policy changes that you'd like to make?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a group brainstorming because this isn't, I think the word is just getting out there that this is a serious issue. We didn't really know, and so, it's for everyone to think about and consider how it would affect you and your community. But yeah, I mean, previously venison was able to be sold, and that's deer were actually almost extinct in this area. At what decade was that? I think you were talking about
Early part of the 20th century.
early part of the 20th century.
Market hunting almost eliminated the deer population in the Northeast.
Yeah.
And that's when the DEC decided to stop issuing licenses for market hunting.
Right.
And the deer population would be generated.
Right.
So regulated market hunting clearly could help control the deer population.
Right.
Which is the real kind of conservation win at that time, and I think demonstrates well kind of our place in that ecosystem. And obviously it swung a little bit, it overcorrected and it swung a bit far the opposite direction, but I think it's important to kind of maintain our role in knowing that humans affect the population, and this overabundance of deer that we have now is the direct cause of several decisions that were made, not only that outlawing of market hunting, but
and there's a few more dynamics to consider. Yeah, so that time period where deer were almost extinct is when all the forests we know today grew, because all these sugar maples would have not been able to grow today. So we're looking at a remnant of that time when deer were basically extinct in this area. There's so many dynamics that we don't know all about. I think another thing to consider is deer had natural predators. There was wolves and perhaps the eastern mountain lion were important predators of deer, and we don't have them anymore. But you may have heard that coyote are kind of evolving to fill that niche. Coyotes are learning how to hunt in a pack. They're getting larger. So they're kind of filling an ecological niche that was missing. You may have heard that keystone predators are important. They have cascading effects on an ecosystem. Removing a major predator, it would be like removing like a great white from the ocean or something. And so that's something to consider.
Is there some way, so on our property, we've always had a huge coyote population until last year for some reason, and now our deer population has exploded. Is there some way to promote, don't tell my neighbor with the sheep farm, but is there some way, to promote, or is the state managing coyote population? What is going on?
Yeah, that's another important policy issue. Is there's I think coyote hunting is like somewhat unregulated.
Yes.
You can just
Almost
shoot a
entirely.
coyote, like
At night.
yeah.
With on bait, over
Yeah.
spotlight,
Yeah.
over
Right. And similarly with bears, bear eat fawns. They eat deer fawns actually sometimes. I mean, they're mostly, our friendly black bear that, mostly eat blueberries and vegetables and stuff. But they will eat a fawn. I mean, they're not going to go out of their way to chase down, But when these are policy issues. If you apply for a deer tag for the hunting season, they automatically give you a bear tag. You didn't ask for it, but literally everyone who gets a deer tag is allowed to shoot a bear. And then also you're given buck tags, but you have to apply separately for a doe tag.
Right.
So that's an obvious solution is just give out more doe tags, give out less predator tags.
And there's definitely a discrepancy in the social carrying capacity for deer and the ecological carrying capacity for deer. So this social carrying capacity is kind of what generates those trophy bucks, what kind of keeps the hunting population content, and a lot of times it's that threshold that informs the decisions in terms of how many doe tags are allotted for a wildlife management area, and there's less consideration being placed on the ecological carrying capacity, which is generally a lot smaller than the social carrying capacity. So
that's a great point. I have heard that the hunting lobby is very strong with the DEC and prevents things like market hunting because they want the population of deer to be large so that they can find deer to hunt.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of variation in opinions in terms of what is the ideal population size for deer, and there's a lot of different interests to consider
That's
there.
a very strong distinction between social interest and ecological.
And is it that there's too many deer, or is it us reducing their habitat too much? You can really flip the perspective. They do love suburbia. Right. Yeah, and right.
I have heard that far contrary to the idea that we have removed deer habitat, and that's why we see them so much in our neighborhood. We have created deer habitat. Forest edges, fragments of deer forest.
Yeah, and then one final consideration to just add to that policy mix is there's actually 100,000 something indigenous people who live in New York State still. There's 13 different nations and 11 or 12 different reservation lands, recognized indigenous lands. And indigenous people, venison is still the super core part of their diet, and they would like to be able to hunt more, but we're not allowing them to. Currently, the state of New York is not allowing them to do their ceremonial hunts, is not allowing them to hunt during their traditional season, which is a little different from our hunting season. And so just supporting indigenous hunting rights could also help positively affect this situation.
Is there legislation for any of these movements like, you know, the venison, the indigenous lands, everything you're talking about, is there any kind of movement that you could support? And
Yeah, there is some people working on some policy stuff. I don't know exactly. We could like send out their Instagram and you can, yeah. And I think more people should weigh in and make sure that, for example, that people still have enough food for their families, because venison is part of food security for New York State. So, yeah, it's got to be really thought out.
Annabel, can I ask you one question too? As a forester, do you have experience with the 480A program? And then is this type of ecological forestry compatible with that program?
Yeah. The 480A program is, I think it's minimum 30 or 50 acres. 50. Right. So if you have 50 acres of land, this is a program that helps people to continue to own forest land. And part of the reason it actually exists is because every time forest land is sold, people want to sell logs. So every time forest land changes hands, somebody tries to log it and, you know, either get as much money as they can on the way out or on the way in. And that has been a huge detriment to forests. You know, I'm not saying everybody's not really careful, but this happens very frequently. It's one of the main threats to forest health. And so the 480A is reduces your taxes so that you can hold on to forest land without as much of a tax burden. But it also commits your forest to being a working forest. So you do have to like harvest firewood or timber or something so that your forest is part of what hopefully is a sustainable forest economy in New York State, which, like you said, like the natural world being part of people's livelihoods is a beautiful thing, and you know, when it's regenerative. So if you have a good forester who you know creates a careful plan, then you could have a 480A contract and it be, you know, just like what they're doing here. Yeah.
I think at this point we should probably start walking that direction, but there are still trees this way. So of a wrap up to say other than I'm really grateful that you all came out, and I'm hoping that everything that we kind of start and implement here can be future fodder for more of these types of programs where we can walk the woods together and you know, think of more ideas together to how to promote forest health and climate resiliency. And I wanted to thank Annabel for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick, can you remind us, what is part 2? I can't remember.
So
what
part 2, we're back here on July 13th, which is a Saturday, and we're going to be working with Capital Region PRISM, Partners in Regional Invasive Species Management. They're going to be spending a week here leading up to it, July 8th to 12th, and they're going to be mapping out all of the invasive plants in all of those forest stands that we walked through today. And that's going to serve as like a baseline for all of our future work. We're going to be able to kind of monitor the impact of all of our work, both in forestry and volunteer efforts, based on what they're mapping out that week. And then they're also going to be leading us on that Saturday, the 13th, in a kind of hands-on tool, and we're going to have to kind of hand things over to the big heavy machinery, the stuff that won't be able to work in the nuance like we will be.
Who's funding that mapping?
That's DEC funded.
So what program?
It's part of the crew member assistance program through the Capital Region PRISM, but Capital Region PRISM is funded by the New York State DEC.
So it would be helpful if we brought work gloves to this.
And
Hands.
we've got gloves.
We'll have
a
gloves.
favorite
We'll
pair.
have tools. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have all the tools and gloves and water and snacks.
That will be happening on the 13th of July?
Yes.
That's an 8 hour.
Oh, is it? I think it's 2 hours, but if you get really enthusiastic, we won't stop.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And like Taryn said, he's got a QR code there for a survey, but we will send out a bunch of resources and the link to the survey in the next, probably